Welcome and thanks for tuning in. I'm Lynn Berger, host of Lynn Berger Interviews Remarkable People. And today I have the pleasure of speaking with Elizabeth Block, contemporary art and culture historian, senior editor at the Metropolitan Museum of Art, and author specializing in Gilded Age fashion and women's history. You are in for a treat today. Elizabeth is so knowledgeable and so nice. Elizabeth, take us back to your earlier years. Did you know what you wanted to do?
I always say that my trajectory was much more linear than most people I know. Sort of always knew that I was interested in art history from a very young age. I know that's impossible to believe, but I think it probably went back to third grade when I had a strong interest in literature, but also in history, and grew up in Massachusetts and in a town that had a strong history with the milling, textile mills. And in third grade, I was put into one of those classes where, we went and we went to these places and we learned all about them, and then we went to art museums. And so the art and the history has always been with me.
That is quite a story. Did you have any friends that followed that path? Or?
No one else I know has gone directly straight through from third grade through a PhD in one area. I mean, there were some twists and turns a little bit along the way, but it's pretty unique, I think.
So then when you went to college, did you know then you were majoring in art history, or?
Well, I actually majored in English and I minored in art history, so I was a big reader always, and I just always thought that the English major was going to be the most useful and the art history made sense to me as a minor. And then after college, undergraduate, I went to do a master's at Columbia University in American Studies, which is an interdisciplinary degree. And so we took classes in English, politics, history, art history, and film studies, everything like that. But I always knew I was interested in the history of the United States from a visual culture perspective. And so not always strictly from an art history perspective, but really all of these interests came together and then culminated in the PhD, which was in art history with a specialty in late 19th century American painting.
So did you do that straight through?
Not completely straight through. There were some breaks in there, and I also worked full-time while I did the master's and the PhD, which is something else that people are usually surprised at, but it worked for me.
How did you do that?
Time management and a very supportive family. Looking back on those years, I think that I got very lucky with just the way it all worked out over those years. But I always loved doing both, working and learning at the same time, and very goal-oriented person, obviously. So I knew I wanted to eventually get to that dissertation stage, and I was just working away on all fronts.
That's very special. So what was your dissertation on?
My dissertation was on representations of women's hairstyles in American painting in the 19th century. And that topic ended up bringing me into what became my second book, not my first book. And that's often a piece of advice that I give to people who call me and ask, do you think I should do a PhD? I'm not sure if I'm up for 5, 6, 7 years of it. And I always say that you have to want it so badly that you can't picture the rest of your life without that particular degree. And so I did the art history degree with we, believe it or not, had to declare major and a minor at that level, at that graduate school level, which really forces you to focus. So for my major, that was American painting. One of the minors I did was in Renaissance painting, and the other minor was in 20th century painting. And, all of these interests all come together. So with the topic of hairstyles, I was looking at,
We'll get to your
We'll
books
get to that, yes. So that was actually the dissertation topic.
Oh, really?
Yes.
Oh, Oh, you got a lot of information to write a book.
Yes, I did.
That is fantastic. So when you got were you working at the Met while you were at school?
Yes, I was working at the Met while I did the master's and the PhD. Yes.
5 days a week, full
Yeah,
time?
5 days a week. And then I went to school at Columbia in the evenings, which I always think is very important for anyone working in universities, especially in urban settings, to think about, is that many people want to do these degrees, but they're also working during the day, and to offer a wide variety of classes in the evening, and I was able to find that at Columbia for the American Studies degree. And then the same at the Graduate Center, which was where I did my PhD. That's the City University of New York on 35th and 5th, across from the Empire State Building, and they offer just a really wide variety of evening classes, which made it possible.
So tell us about when you started. When did you start at the Met?
I started at the Met in 1999. I started as an editorial copy editor in what is now the retail department, and I really loved it. It was sort of an entry-level position. I had my first job before that was in Washington, D.C. I had gone to the George Washington University, and my first job was as an editorial assistant at the Hirshhorn Museum, which is part of the Smithsonian, and I'm still very close with the woman who hired me there, the publisher. And so my first job at the Met sort of followed from that when I moved to New York. And so I was a copywriter for the retail department. And what that meant was if you ever buy a piece of jewelry or a shawl or even a T-shirt at the Met store, it comes with a short description of what the design was inspired by. And so because I had this art history background, I would write a few sentences about, what a certain Egyptian necklace was based on in the collection of the museum. So I got to know the works of art very well doing that.
How fun.
Yeah,
That's a fun job.
That was a fun job. So that was first.
Yeah, I visualize the paper.
Right?
I bought many things at the museum.
Exactly, especially the jewelry, because those little pieces of paper would tuck right into the boxes.
Yes.
So lots of jewelry.
So you did that for a while.
I did that for a few years, and then when I knew I wanted to go to Columbia and do the American Studies degree, I said, all right, I just can't stand this anymore. I need to be around the paintings. And so I became a research assistant in the American Wing with one of the curators of American paintings, and worked on an exhibition there, and then always had my eye on editing. I knew I loved editing. I loved research and writing, but also editing other people's work and helping people express their arguments and their research and their making sure their grammar is correct, and making sure that they were getting their points across to, say, a general reader. And so from there, I became the editor of the website for a year and a half. And then finally dream job editor in the publications and editorial department, and then senior editor.
So it's your dream job.
I think so. Yes, I think so.
When you look back, did you think that was going to happen?
I'm not surprised that it happened, to be honest. Because my first job as an editorial assistant at the Hirshhorn Museum, I was working one-on-one with the publisher there, and we just got on so well, and the training was just so it came naturally, and we had such a strong rapport, and I loved everything I was working on. So I was just like, yeah, I could see this. I could see myself having a job similar to hers.
That's great. That's great. You had
possibly
that
also unusual.
Yeah, well, you were very focused.
Yes, very focused, always very focused. If you're going to do those degrees, you need to have your eye on the prize.
Well, now, these influences did not come from your family? They didn't do this type of work?
Oh, yes. I think they always a strong sense of history, and like I said, I grew up in Massachusetts, and so a very historical area, and we had, which was also very unusual in the town of Andover, Massachusetts, we had one of, if not the only, I believe it is the only art museum on a secondary school campus that's dedicated to American art.
Okay,
so yes, and then frequent trips through our school to the Museum of Fine Arts in Boston. So You know, I remember in grade school always going to the MFA, and really at those early ages, and so I encourage people with small children always to bring children to museums, and just even if you think they're not taking anything in, they are, and that they should get comfortable with being in an art museum or a museum of any type from a very early age, that they belong there.
Well, that is so true about my children always were in museums, and they love to go to museums now, and it's a great way to spend time together.
I think so.
Yes, yes. And that little drawing class at the Met, my daughter took, and she...
Those are great classes.
Yes, yes.
I remember one year they started students as early as age 2, and you think, you know, what is a 2-year-old going to do? But they're drawing, you know, in these around old masters' paintings and sculptures, and it's really unlike any other opportunity.
So while you were working full-time, you got your PhD. Did you take a break before you started writing some books?
Yes, I took a break. So I finished the PhD, had my son.
No, that's a good thing to use
then
the
there
time.
was, use the time wisely. So there were a few years there where I just knew I needed to focus on family, and was happy to do it. And then 3 or 4 years after graduating is when I started publishing articles. My PhD advisor had said, start with articles and start with well-known artists, which was very good advice. And so I started, my first article was on Winslow Homer, who was one of my favorites. You must also know the artist, and watercolors and paintings. So first article was on Winslow Homer, and then I went on to publish on John Singer Sargent, and then that led to my interest in images of women and what they were wearing and how their hair was styled in the paintings. So a couple of other articles came out, and then I knew I was ready to write a book. I knew I was ready. You know, sometimes you just have these research files that are overflowing, either paper files or on your Google Drive, and just like, all right, I need to put this all together and get this out into the world. So the first book was called Dressing Up, The Women Who Influenced French Fashion. And it's about how wealthy women in the United States were exerting power of spending money, but also how they were tastemakers and how they were exerting taste from the United States, which was sort of new to the taste-making world. And so I'm talking about women like Caroline Astor, Alva Vanderbilt, and how they were going to Paris up to twice a year and were shopping and placing custom orders at couturiers like the House of Worth and the House of Doucet and many others. And so I go into showing beautiful, beautiful dresses, but also the backgrounds of some of these businesses and how they worked, and then looking and reading about women's spending practices. So these women, you know, their husbands and their brothers and their families were they were the titans of industry, and they were making money in the railroads and real estate and even gold and silver mining in the West. And so just unbelievable amounts of money were available, and so these women chose to spend it wisely. They were doing philanthropic work, holding benefit events, funding schools. Yes, but they were also spending on what they were wearing, which was very important to them. And so they wanted to patronize the finest makers in Paris. And so that was a deeply researched book that labor of love, and then shopped it around and was able to land my dream publisher, MIT Press. They published the book, and it's fully illustrated, which makes me very happy.
Yes, yes, the books are beautifully illustrated.
You.
So when you were writing the book, did you have an intention of what you wanted your readers to get out of it, or was it more personal for each reader?
I had a very clear mission with the book, which was to show how women were not passive in society in the United States or in Europe, and that we should be taking these women seriously, even if they were spending their money on, you know, textiles and fashion, and at milliners to get their to get their hats or to get their hair done, and certainly the jewelry, that every decision they were making was a movement of a special agency. They were making choices on a daily basis and spending very wisely, saving very wisely, preparing their next generation, buying heirlooms. So very much a story about women's power.
Oh. And how is the book writing process for you?
That comes pretty naturally. I think that it's a process of it comes out of the research. So I spend so many hours, at the libraries, or now you can do so much research online, or going to galleries, going to museums and seeing exhibitions. And so I'm always just sort of visually filing away subjects that I want to write about. And then there is a point where it just starts to all come together, and I can envision how the chapters are going to be divided up. And I just start outlining and filling in from there. It's not, always a breeze. Certainly, there's always a chapter that will be more difficult than others. What I found over the course of doing 3 books now is that the chapter that I think is going to be the first one usually ends up being the last one. It usually becomes being the one that's the most difficult to get out.
So there's a second book. You want to tell us a little bit about that?
Yeah, so the second book is called Beyond Vanity, The History and Power of Hairdressing. And that's about the hairdressing industry, but also about women's choices with hairstyling in the 19th century.
What was it about hairdressing that?
It just was so evident to me looking at portraits by grand portraiture, either in England or in France or the United States, and I'll mention John Singer Sargent again, these grand portraits that we all are so familiar with, like Madame X or some of the other, countesses that are in the paintings, or American heiresses, and we spend so much time talking about the dresses and the red velvets, the black velvets. Oh, Madame X's dress is too slender. What was she thinking? That no one was paying attention to, like, above the neck. It's like we look at the faces, yes, and we're like, oh, beautiful face. But their hairstyles were never being remarked on. In the 18th century, you do get some attention in the scholarship to hairstyles because they're over the top. 19th century hairstyles are closer to the head. They're not as close, as you say, closer to the heavens as in the 18th century. But it was always so interesting to me that it was subtle, and there were these updos, and there were pieces of hair jewelry, like strings of pearls, a bit subtle and very tasteful, and that it just wasn't getting attention in the scholarship. Not to mention the hats. I mean,
yes,
the hats. I always say that women at this period would never leave the home without being fully dressed, and that never means just the dress or the gown or the robe or the coat, but it means how they were styling their hair and the hat that they chose. And so I focused on hairstyles. One of the most rewarding aspects of writing Beyond Vanity was that the material resonated with hairstylists today, because it was really, in some ways, a love letter to the industry, the profession of hairdressing, that doesn't always get the attention that it deserves.
The third book. Tell us a little bit about the third book.
My third book is just out. It's a new release, and it's a gift book, and it's called Gilded Age Fashion, because we're in this moment where a lot of people have a renewed interest in the late 19th century, especially through some television shows that are out in the world. And this interest in the extreme amounts of money, the extreme amounts of spending that were happening in that era, is really resonating with some of us today, and also the large chasm between the different classes in society, which we're also seeing today. But in the book, I wanted to write a book that was now with a commercial publisher and not an academic publisher, and it's based in deep research, but it's very, very accessibly written, and sort of brings the reader, the general reader, into the world of how a woman would get dressed throughout the course of her day. And so the chapters are divided into morning, afternoon, evening, and then balls and weddings, and then interspersed with really like showstopper accessories like ermine fur muffs that are just exquisite so that your hands wouldn't get cold if you were on a carriage ride in the winter. And then some jewelry, and then some grooming tools like, oh, there's silver-backed hairbrushes and combs and things that just by Tiffany and Company that take your breath away.
Well, it sounds like you had fun with that book.
I had fun with this one.
Because it seems like the other books, there was more research, you spent more time, and this you kind of let your creativity go.
Yes, it's very much a curated selection of my favorite dresses by the House of Worth or Pingot or Doucet or Pekin, and then a chance to bring in some of these accessories that didn't quite have a place in the first or second book.
Okay, what a nice thing. And is there a fourth one coming soon?
There is, and should we break news here on our show here today? So my next book is on underclothing. So undergarments, which is an area that I touched on in a couple of places in my work so far, but we're talking about petticoats, corsets, lining, skirt lifters, all these accessories that women would put on before the dress went on.
So now I want to get to some fun facts that listening to some of your Instagram posts and reels about, instead of face serum, that they pressed flowers?
Yes, so if anyone knows the portrait of Madame X by John Singer Sargent, she very famously has lightened her skin color, lightened her skin tone. And it would be from like grounding up either powder or lilac powder, which Mrs. Gautreaux was known for, and applying it to the face, and then making sure that you had a uniform texture. This was very important. It's in all of the etiquette books. So that they were very into skincare. They just didn't call it that.
And then I also found the hats, as you mentioned before, the size of the hats. They were very appropriate for the hair, right?
Yes, there was a rivalry between the hairstylists and the milliners. Milliners were practitioners, artists who made hats and bonnets. And you wanted to make sure, the hairstylists always wanted to show off their work, but then the makers of the hats also wanted to show off their work. But if it was an era when you had large hairstyles in fashion, then the milliners would get upset because then their large hats would not sit quite right. So there was always this balance, but hats, I think, another area of research that is due for a comeback.
The children's clothes, when did a child first appropriately get dressed?
Well, children were always, appropriately dressed because their mothers made sure of it and their caretakers made sure of it. So again, the etiquette books are just packed with information and guidance for new mothers and for older sisters on how to dress little ones. And there were lots of rules in this era if you were in an upper class or elite member of society, of an elite family, that you would make sure that little boys were wearing short pants and that girls were in skirts that were long enough and appropriate, and then they could only get a little bit shorter when they got a little bit older, and then they would come out into society and they had to be dressed as a woman. I can spend 3 hours just researching a certain, season of fashion in a certain era, or the paintings of one particular woman artist who, I've tracked down and found that she was, a student of a famous painter, but you haven't heard too much about her, and just the love for the visual.
And now it's so much different than when you first started, right?
It is.
Research has changed.
It is. There's so much online, and for that we have to credit all the archivists out there and the librarians who make it so much easier than it was in the past. Thank goodness.
Yeah,
for them.
you know, I only wrote one book, but I had to carry books from the, library.
Oh yes,
Yeah,
no, ebooks and
yeah,
databases
and
have
it
changed the
changed
game.
the whole thing. Life
Changed
has
the
changed.
game, and scanned newspapers have really changed everything.
Yes, the world, it's just shifted. So now you have to go through all the information to pull out the pertinent information.
Right, right. And there's also, some people would argue, too many books right
Yeah,
now
wow.
that people are pushing out into the world. That makes it hard to get to know any singular book, but I hope that people find my books.
Yes, well, it's definitely, you have an audience of people that it's
I'm grateful.
fascinating. Yes, yes. So stepping back, is there any kind of, I had to explain to a younger person starting in their career any things to think about? You were extraordinarily focused, yet, do you want to share some of your wisdom?
I would remind people that their trajectory will most likely not be as straightforward or linear, and you might end up, a science major and then discover a love of the arts later. And I would say that there are so many careers that combine both. So you can be a math person and an art person. You can be an English major and a scientist. One of the areas of research in museums that's growing is conservation. There's certainly a long history of conservation, but I'm seeing young people become very interested in restoring paintings, conserving them, preserving them for the future, and for that you need a science background. You can also be a research scientist in an art museum, which I think a lot of people don't quite realize that those professions are out there. And so keep looking and seeing that you don't have to pick one or the other. One of my talk last night, a gentleman came up to me after the talk and he said, I always wanted to be a historian, but I decided to go into medicine. And he said, but I spend my lunch breaks listening to history podcasts. And then we got into a whole conversation about certain favorites. And he was telling me, he was educating me on textile history because he finds time for that passion.
Yes, it's career and life planning.
Exactly.
You could do both. Well, Elizabeth, thank you so much for taking time out today to speak with me. I recommend that people look into your books and your articles. They're just so interesting and fun, and you learn tons.
Thank
you, Elizabeth.
I enjoyed it. Thanks so much.
Thank you.